So I wanted to say good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for our first speaker series event for the 2022-2023 school year. I'm Emily Bala, the mental health lead for the district, and have the distinct pleasure of introducing Dr. Jean Clinton for our workshop, Love Builds Brains, Bringing Joy Back to Learning. Before we begin, I want to start this evening acknowledging the land we are currently living and working upon. Today and every day, we acknowledge that our learning is taking place on unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. The Algonquin people are stewards of this land, their culture and presence nurturing it since time immemorial. Following this leadership, we too must walk gently on this land to protect it and maintain its health so that it can nurture future generations. As we enter this space of learning this evening and explore how we can reconnect our children to the joy of learning, and as we start this school year, it is also important to acknowledge the violence, hurt, and attempted erasure of Indigenous peoples within education and beyond. In identifying harmful practices that continue to exist and making a concerted effort to disrupt them, we see the liberatory potential of education. This is the promise of decolonizing spaces and places. Let us center the voices of Indigenous students, families, and staff, and celebrate the strengths and gifts that they bring to the community. May we commit to relationships rooted in healing, to use our power to build authentic, compassionate relationships grounded in social justice. May we listen, believe, and act so that we can both repair and reimagine together what schools can look like for all students. Education is fundamental to any process of reconciliation, and we will therefore continue to unlearn, to learn, and to relearn. It is hard to believe that it is September already. We know that the return to school is a time of transition for everyone, and that can bring up many mixed emotions, I think, both in ourselves as well as in our children. And we also know that the last 2 years have been difficult. And once again, here we are looking to a new school year ahead with mixed emotions. I think we are all wanting to look ahead with hope, with optimism, and with a readiness to find ways to support our children to find the joy in learning. So I am overjoyed that we are here with Dr. Clinton joining us for this evening to share her wisdom and her expertise. Dr. Jean Clinton is a clinical professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Neurosciences at McMaster Division of Child Psychiatry. She's on staff at McMaster Children's Hospital with cross appointments in pediatrics and family medicine, and an associate in the Department of Child Psychiatry at Sick Children's Hospital. She has been a consultant to children and youth mental health programs, child welfare, and primary care for over 30 years. Dr. Clinton is renowned nationally and internationally as an advocate for children's issues and was appointed as an education advisor to the Premier of Ontario and the Minister of Education from 2014 to 2018. Her special interest lies in brain development and the crucial role relationships and connectedness play. Dr. Clinton champions the development of a national comprehensive child well-being strategy, including a system of early learning and care for all young children and their families, and is equally committed to ensuring that children's and youth voices, needs and voices are heard and respected. Dr. Clinton would ask that as we go through the workshop this evening, that you put any questions in the question and answer. And certainly we will wait to the end, but she will provide some time to answer those questions at the end of her presentation. We also did want to let you know that this session, as I mentioned, will be recorded to be made available to parents as we move forward. So with that, I will pass it over to Dr. Clinton.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Emily. And that land acknowledgement that you just shared with us is really quite something. And I'd love if you would share that with me after. I'm really thrilled to be here with you at the Ottawa-Carleton board. I'll speak for a little bit over an hour. And just to give you a heads up, I am a child psychiatrist, but I spend a lot of my time as a knowledge translator. I am a little bit irreverent at times, so I do hope that you enjoy my humor and and don't find it offensive. But please do share. I'm really interested in hearing your perspective. So feel free to sit back, to enjoy. You will have a copy of the recording afterwards, and if some of you want the slides, I'll be sending them along to Emily for your own use. So sit back and enjoy. Let me just make sure that I pull up the right PowerPoint, because this is a busy time. So thumbs up for Mike if everything's working all right. So I have to say, I love the title "Love Builds Brains," and not only, thanks, Mike, not only because it's the name of a book, my first book that was published in the past couple of years, but because it's what I know to be true. I'm going to talk to you tonight about neuroscience, about brain science, and about the absolutely fantastic power of the brain to change with the experiences that it has. And I also really want to emphasize that there are lots of people talking gloom and doom out there about, oh my gosh, we've been through COVID, kids have fallen behind, we've got this learning gap, we've got this, we've got that. I want to really energize you, I hope, and just make you feel that the education system that you guys have in the Ottawa-Carleton board is really one that can meet your children where they are. They've got leaders like Emily here as your mental health lead who are thinking about what are the conditions that are needed to support the educators, to support your little ones and your big ones. So I really hope to inspire you to be hopeful about where we're going. But I absolutely recognize that these have been really challenging times, and some of you are feeling like, oh my gosh, we just get to the top of this, and then these the COVID times, and then we hear these weird mixed messages about mask, no mask, 5 days, no days, but you've been holding on. You've been holding on with your fingertips, and I'm here to say that we can make a huge difference in our children's lives by the way that we approach and who we are as parents for them. Now, I can tell you, I'm not an expert in parenting, and the reason I say that is because I have 5 kids and 7 grandchildren. And so what I can tell you is that just when I thought, aha, I know how to do this, along would come another one, and they would be completely different. Any of you who have 2 kids know this. They would be completely different. And I go, holy moly, how am I going to deal with this? So particularly when it came to adolescence. But, let me share with you one of my deep beliefs. And why I spend, Mike and I were talking a few minutes before coming on, about how much time I spend reaching out to people as a knowledge translator, as a taking what the science is telling us and translating it, making it accessible for you as parents, for educators. I've spent a lot of time speaking to judges and lawyers as well. And the reason for this is education is hugely important to me, always has been. And I had a wonderful mentor called the late Dr. Paul Steinauer. And he said, Jean, as child psychiatrists, we can spend a lot of time in our offices, like being in the middle of that rushing stream of kids with distress and dismay and even disorder, trying to capture as many of them as we can as they go flying past. But we have to spend some of our time, if not a lot of our time, being upstream, trying to figure out what are the things that are going on. that are having kids fall into the river in the first place? Or, and the other picture there, why have we spent so much time in mental health and mental illness down at the bottom of a cliff, capturing kids when they fall, rather than being upstream and figuring out how can we stop them? How can we prevent them from becoming ill and distressed in the first place? So I'm an upstreamist, periodically an extremist. You know, as you heard, I was an advisor to the previous premier, not this one or this education minister. But you know, it was an opportunity for me to be to really push and say things to the ministry about how can we focus on well-being if we've got a system of testing that is making kids so very, very anxious? How can we hold both of those positions? So an extremist at times, but you know, I have an informed view, I would say, because I read tons and I'm a lifelong learner. But what we're learning now is that education, if we can get our education system right, and I would say our public education system as well as other forms, but predominantly our public education system, if we can get it right so that kids learn the subject matter, for sure, numeracy, literacy absolutely are important. But what we know is that if kids can develop their social skills, the ability to get along with others as a preschooler and a kindergarten kid is a better predictor of where you're going to be in grade 8 than if you can read and write. Now, it's great if you can read and write, but it's even better if you can get along with others. So that social and emotional development, that thinking about the whole child, as I'm talking about, if we have an education system that can really think about that and develop it with great support with people like Emily and School Mental Health Ontario, then we're powering kids up to be able to cope with the kind of world that is the reality now. And, you know, I have been studying as much as I can the teachings of Indigenous peoples. And what I've learned is that if in our public education system, we can actually take what the teachings, what our learnings are from Indigenous people. For example, as I've learned the Mohawk culture, and I learned this from Elder Tom Porter, the Mohawk culture says that children are the sacred ones. They are the heart of the nation, that it is our sacred responsibility to bring up our kids. And, you know, I think if we could communicate that, if we could support parents in making that so, I'm so thrilled to be able to watch my own children who, you know, they've never heard me talk. They don't know that I say this kind of thing, but they have their true north belief about how precious their children are. And, you know, early this morning, my daughter has just moved away, breaks my heart with her 4 little ones. It doesn't break my heart. No. It's going to be just a new chapter. But as I was picking up some car snacks for her as they were doing this long drive, I was in one of our local grocery stores, and there was a mum and I learned an ex-partner and a little one. And the way that that little one was treated, this get over here, you're always in trouble, why are you doing this, all of that just really broke my heart, that the stressors that mum was experiencing was interfering with her ability to see that child as a sacred and precious one. So it's a deep story. I'm just having a little trouble here moving my slides on. But that, to think about approaching parenting as a joyful experience. To think about partnering with the education system as parents as a joyful experience, I think is a goal that we need to be thinking about. Now, I said I've got 5 kids, and you can imagine, with 5, 10 years apart from the oldest to the youngest, with none of them like the other. So I had the opportunity to work with educators who saw the special rights, the special needs of some of my children, the giftedness of some of them, and only occasionally did I come across educators that I could kind of connect with, to have them as joyful about the learning journey of my kids. I can say, my oldest now is 35. I can now say that I come across many more educators now who that is the case. So let's think about joy, because here's a little dip in this presentation. Why do we need to be thinking about that? Well, because what we've learned is that what we've gone through, what we're going through, because wave 7 is on its way, what we're going through with COVID is creating the conditions that are going to be, pretty hard to deal with. And when we think about what do our kids need to be able to live through, grow through, and thrive through, the times are going to be VUCA times. This is originally a military term that described when the situations were volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Well, hello, 2022. So the point I want to make about VUCA times is that we don't want to get back to normal, the way it was before, because it wasn't skilling our kids up. It wasn't helping our kids develop the skills that they needed to be able to deal with those times. We had lots of kids who were doing all right, well in school, but what they were learning is how to answer the test questions rather than to be good at life as well as good at learning. Well, that's the big move now. The big move is, if we are going to help our kids deal with these complex times, then we're going to need these VUCA times. They're going to need skills, attitude, knowledge, and ways of self-reflection that are going to get them through it. But, I want to acknowledge, as a child psychiatrist, just how hard these times have been for you as parents. My colleagues at the Offord Centre at McMaster University have done a big survey, the Ontario Parent Survey, and it tells us that you guys as parents have really taken a beating. So this was the 3rd wave. And if you look at, this is a busy slide and you can look at it afterwards, but, in the Ontario Parent Survey, almost 70% of parents reported significant depressive symptoms. We have to do better. We need to find ways of supporting families. Because for me, because I'm a child psychiatrist, if parents are feeling this overwhelmed and depressed, how can they possibly be there to support their kids? Worry about weight, worry about finances, worry about jobs, and then these huge worries about your kids. So these have been really very difficult times. But what I can tell you with confidence is that education systems and your board, the Ottawa-Carleton board, has really been thinking about, how do we deal with these VUCA times? How do we figure out what is the best thing for the kids? And so what I'm learning is like what Maya Angelou said, and that is, we do the best we can. And I want you to take that to heart. You have done the best that you can with what you know. But when we know better, we do better. So, before the pandemic, I was one of the people talking about, well, we have to watch how much time our kids are on screens. You know, there are guidelines from the American and the Pediatric Associations, the Canadian Pediatric Association. I'm on the early years task force. And, you know, the guideline was no screens before 2 and 1 hour of screens between 2 and 5 and so on and so on. And then along came COVID. So, like, give me a freaking break. You have been juggling work at home, kids at home, partners at home, running the house, trying to figure out how you're going to have your kids educated. How are you going to have your own workplace go? So, like, have kids had a bit too much screen time? Yeah. Yep, they have. Has it damaged the children for the most part? Probably not. But what do? We know better now, and we can move forward and start cutting back some of that screen time. Because why do I say that? Well, we know that all behavior has a reason. And we have been hearing from you as parents, and I've been hearing from educators as well, that the behaviors of kids, COVID kids and kids who have missed attending school for a long time, you know, Ontario had our kids out longer than anywhere else, that there have been significant behavior issues that have come up. But I think what we really need to do is think about every behavior has a reason. And so you may see the tip of the iceberg, the behavior, but what you don't see unless you really think about what's going on with my kid, not what's wrong with you, but what's going on, what's up? Because underneath that behavior are all kinds of feelings, emotions, self-talk, attitudes that are running things down. So what you see is not what's always there, or whatever that phrase is. I can't remember, but you know, what you see is what you get. But no, it's not. It's absolutely not, because what you're not seeing is, look at all of these things underneath. We have seen lots of anxiety, lots of challenges in our adolescents, and I'll talk a bit about their adolescent brain, but a huge need to belong. And when we socially isolated, we should have been saying, no, 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 let's not socially isolate. Let's physically isolate, but emotionally make sure we connect. So look at all those things that can affect behavior under the water. So I want to, so if you were to ask me, what's my intention in spending this time with you tonight? It's really to help you think about not only your kids with compassion, to reach out and connect and have hope for where we're moving forward, but also give yourself permission to have compassion for yourself. Make sure you're connecting to others and be hopeful for the future. Because what we know is, you who have come here tonight as an example, and who will listen to this recording afterwards, I'm hoping really see the huge role that parents as partners play in children's well-being and outcome. Now, parents as partners can take, you know, lots of forms, from going to webinars to fundraising at the school. But, you know, the biggest impact that you can have on your child's learning, one is being part of, connected to what's happening in the school. And that, you know, that kind of, just because of our silly systems, kind of stops at high school, but it shouldn't. It shouldn't. We should still be involved in a different kind of a way, because our kids don't want us around, but we should have communication. But it's about, how do you model at home? How do you model and support learning, lifelong learning, curiosity? Do you have books at home? Do you ask the kids, what are you learning? What are you excited about? Not just what do you have for homework? And when you've got something that you're learning yourself, you share that. The effect size, you know, the big scientific term is how big an impact does something like parent involvement have when you dig deep in terms of children's how well they do academically. When you dig deep, It's not about doing their projects for them or helping them with their homework. It's about modeling a love of learning and being curious and interested in it. So to do that, you got to be a partner. So one of the ways that all of this makes tremendous sense to me is that when your kids, whether they're 3-year-olds or whether they're 18-year-olds, when your kids see you as curious, hopeful, excited about their learning and your own learning, and compassionate toward yourself to say, oh man, I wish I wasn't so beating myself up anymore. I'm going to learn how to be present and take in the good right now. When they see that, their brains get changed. So this is the marvelous area of neuroplasticity. So that means that the brain, the neurons, which is the main kind of cell in the brain, the neurons get turned on to be active or to be not active by the environment. Now, this is called neuroplasticity. So our experiences build our brains. You hear my Scottish accent. And that's because when I was growing up in Scotland, up until 11 years of age, my brain was bombarded by the sounds of the Scottish lovely, lovely, lovely lilt. And so I got wired up to speak with this accent. I cannot speak without it. So my ability to speak without the Scottish accent got snipped away. My older sibs all have Scottish accents, but my younger 2 brothers don't have Scottish accents. Their brain remained plastic, moldable, changed by the experiences that they had because they were much younger when we came to Canada. So, you know, my first degree is music and philosophy. And we used to go out, would you believe, we used to go out to the bar and we'd have these big arguments. What's more important? Is it nature or is it nurture? Is it genes or is it the environment? And what we've learned now is that that was a great time, but it was a waste of time. Because what we now know is that the brain, the genes, are actually listening to the environment, the experiences that we have as little ones, being picked up, being hugged, being rocked, being read to, all of that is literally turning those neurons, that big brain cell, on. If the stimulation comes in often enough, like serve and return, for example. So I ask you a question, or the baby a question, or see something the baby does, and I go goo goo gaga. I was just on. My daughter lives in the Yukon, and my little granddaughter just turned 1 today. So we were on the portal, and she's pointing at Nana and Papa, and as she points, I respond back. As she blows a kiss, we blow it back. That's called serve and return. When your kids come home in grade 11 and they're saying, you know, and you say, man, that sounds really hard. That's a serve and return. That is what builds the brain. And we know that the early years, for sure, massively important. There's more brain activity then than any other time in life, but it still goes on throughout life, and there's a spectacular changes in the brain that happens in adolescence as well. So why am I telling you this? Because parenting, the relationships that you have with your children and your young people literally builds their brain. So here's a schematic of it. All of the areas of the brain are connected by these neurons. They talk to each other by sending little neurochemical transmitters across a little area called the synapse there that you see down at the bottom. So things like dopamine, remember that one, dopamine, our reward neurotransmitter, and serotonin, you know, our happy one, our oxytocin, our cuddle hormone, and also a transmitter. So the brain is built by in comes through those tree-like branches, the dendrites, in comes a stimulus, repeated over and over and over again. It gets enough of a gumph, a boomf, a spark that it connects up. And the more that it connects up, the ones that fire together actually wire up together and create interactions and networks across the brain. So, what's amazing, I'm involved with a program called Mind Up with the Goldie Hawn Foundation. And they are one of the programs these days that are actually teaching kids about how their brains work and how learning actually helps their brains grow. So the more we learn, the more connections we make. Now, this is huge, because it used to be that people thought there was a bell curve, and that, there's going to be this percentage of kids who are not going to do very well in school. There's going to be a big bunch in the middle that are going to do all right. And then there's going to be an exceptional top one. So there's a law of averages. Well, you know what? Now the scientists are saying this is a problem, because of neuroplasticity, this kid down here, this 25% down here that, we would have, education system said, well, they're not going to go very far. We don't have to spend too much time, blah, blah, blah. We now know that we do not know the potential that any kid has at any time. And that's why there's a huge move to be thinking about the education systems, is thinking about the whole child, to be thinking about what is the potential in every single child, because their brains can change throughout life. But there are some other brain facts, and one of them here is from Dr. Bruce Perry. And what he teaches us is that, yep, we've got the brain, it develops with this repetitive, nurturing experiences, or even non-nurturing, frightening experiences. They also build the brain. But the brain develops from the bottom, simple areas, simple functions like heart rate and breathing, and it develops up to the top. If you can imagine that top part that says season, reason, and reflect, that is like your thinking part of the brain, and the other, relate and regulate, are deeper inside our brain, and they are more primitive. And what he has taught us is that in order to get to reasoning, you first have to regulate. So imagine an 18-month-old. Imagine an 18-month-old, or imagine a 13-year-old having a complete meltdown. You know that you cannot talk them out of that meltdown. What we know is that until that lower, more basic part of the brain is soothed through relationship, by the way, through music, through rocking. Sometimes if you get to the regulate, then you can do a bit of meditation. But first you have to regulate. First regulate, then you can relate, and then you can reason. So tell me, how am I going to help my kid regulate? How am I going to help my 13-year-old regulate? Well, what is a magical reality is that the brain is a social organ. We are absolutely wired to connect. So how can we soothe that savage beast? Relationship, relationship, relationship. And speaking of relationships and joy, look at that. I love this picture. It just happens to be my oldest son and my oldest grandson. And, you see, there's more than just eye contact going on there. There are minds meeting and energy transmitting. We are absolutely wired to connect. The human brain's primary environment is relationship. So if there's nothing else you take from tonight's presentation, I want you to think about, in this dilemma I'm having with my child or my young person, what am I doing to maintain a relationship with them that says, I'm here for you. I'm your best bet. I'm going to limit your behaviors for sure, but I'm not going to push you out. No tough love coming out of here. But you know, it's not just for you as parents. I'm working with many districts and school boards across the country to say, well, you know, if we are such a social species, what are we doing in our education system to make sure that this social and relational aspect is being considered? Because you know what? When you're stressed, the biggest thing that can help you is relationship, our social connectedness. So here's a thing to take. As you are parenting, whether it is, these are all pictures of little ones. I've got pictures of big ones, of big kids too. Are you thinking, first, I'm going to connect before I correct? Why? Well, think about it for yourself. If somebody says to you, why did you do that? Why are you always doing that? You never pick this up. You never do that. What's your reaction? It is, well, it might be something like that. But if somebody says, gee, there must be something going on. How come the kitchen isn't finished? What's happened? If we take the perspective of, I want to understand your emotion, you still want the damn kitchen tidied up. But when you can connect first before you correct, then you've got a partnership that can move forward. But you know, what's the reality? And I know this better than I'd like to know, to be honest with you. And that is, I've spent a lot of my time as a parent, as a big party pooper, directing and correcting my kids. So think about, and this is love building brains. Think about, are you connecting or correcting? And here's something else to think about. Are you a carpenter? So in your mind, you know just how you want your kids to turn out. Or are you a gardener? This is a great book by Alison Gopnik, by the way. Are you a gardener in your parenting? And I ask educators the same question. Are you thinking about, you are creating the conditions, some call it the ecosystem, you know, the conditions where your child, your young person can grow and thrive? Or are you fixing them up, making them do this, making them do that? So something to think about. Because what I've learned in my 35 years as a child psychiatrist is, when we are more gardener, now sometimes we're all going to go into the carpenter mode, but when we're more gardener, you know, you do have to create the conditions for that soil, sunlight, water, you need all those conditions. But you also have to do some pruning and correcting. So it's not that a gardener is just, oh yeah, man, free love, we're doing this all right, okay? But the key ingredient is the relational deposits into the emotional piggy bank. So how are you doing? I see what you're feeling. Tell me more about it. So easy to do that when they're cute and bouncy and bubbly. But what happens when it comes to the adolescent brain? So here I've got some great news. And the great news is, we can continue to make emotional deposits into that piggy bank. But if we understand how the brain is changing, you might just have a, oh, now it makes sense. So when I was in medical school, there was lots of things that people talked about, you know, the early years count so much, and then you just kind of consolidate learning. And then a guy called Jay Geed at the National Institute of Health started looking at brain scans. So when I was in medical school, we didn't have all of these fancy MRIs and fMRIs and PET scans and other things, and you know, all kinds of different ones now. And so we looked at behavior, but we couldn't really see inside the brain what was happening in the brain as that behavior was happening. Well, now we can. Now, it's not a perfect science at all, but we've got insights now. So Jay Geed had a bunch of teenagers, and he was able to put them in an MRI scanner and was astounded, because what he saw was that the adolescent brain was changing dramatically in ways that we hadn't known about before. In fact, the adolescent brain, keep this in your mind, is under construction. under construction. So next time when you're about to lose it, when something happens at home, say under construction. Why do I say that? Because areas of the brain like emotion regulation, hugely getting sorted out. The brain cells, the neurons are connecting up in different ways. Adolescents have a pull to be with their peer group. It's not that they're pushing you away, it's that biologically they're driven to be with their peers. So we now know that that brain is under construction. And here's a composite slide from Jay Geed that shows the blue areas are maturing areas. And so what you see is between the ages, in this case, 5 to 20, they've now expanded, by the way, the adolescence is from about 11, 12 to 28 years of age. Yeah, the brain is actually changing. And the last areas to develop, you'll see, are those frontal lobes. So blue represents this maturing brain. So great. Their brains are under construction. So we still have to ask ourselves, adolescents, why do they do the things they do? So, you know, you look at this picture and you say, okay, so does this guy know that this is dangerous? Does he know? Has he thought about the danger of diving into an unknown body of water? What's underneath there? Does he know? He does. But what is he thinking? He's thinking about, I'm going to give those tourists on that boat a thrill, and I'm going to do it here. And not only that, I'm being egged on by my friends on the top of the cliff as well. And so is he thinking? Yes, he is. But what he's doing here is he's privileging the thrill of it above, the thrill of it before and above the danger of it. Now, you might say, how do you know that? Well, because that's my son. So I do know it. So what we know is that the brain is changing. It matures, it becomes more specialized in adolescence. So what young people are busy doing, so whether it is playing drums or, and it's one of the reasons that my friends, psychology friends, were so distressed at COVID with everything being shut down, because kids need those activities and we shouldn't shut down. Again, let's find the ways to do it, that kids can still be together. But anyway, so the brain matures by becoming more specialized, that's the gray matter, and more connected, that's the white matter. So as the white matter is because as areas are firing, they get myelinated. That's like a copper wiring around them called myelin, and it goes and it makes the signals faster, and it means that in between signals you don't have to have a big pause or kind of like a breath. It just zaps. So that area, that's happening in the brain. But also the deep, remember I said about regulate, relate, and reason? So deep things in the brain, in the hierarchical model. Well, what we know in the adolescent brain is that the last area to build up all the connections is that top reason part, the prefrontal cortex or the frontal cortex, and the limbic system, which is deeper, the emotional system, which is deeper in the brain, more primitive, less smart, more emotionally driven. That is under construction. So you've got a huge drive to have a good time, but you don't have the thinking part of the brain all the time in certain conditions. You've got great thinking brain. The adolescent brain is a phenomenal thinking brain, but when emotion comes into it, a little bit tricky. So it's a time of tremendous plasticity. But as it's kind of, this is a time when we have more issues around mental health. And, you know, like 75% of adults with mental health issues tell us that their troubles began in childhood. And so people are wondering, is it because there's so much changeability going on that makes them more vulnerable, that makes more anxiety and depression possible? So there's a fabulous book, I love the work of Dan Siegel, called Brainstorm. So if you want to read more about this adolescent brain, Brainstorm. So what Dan has done, Dan Siegel, has said that the essence of adolescence, he loves acronyms, is there is a tremendous emotional spark. There's an engagement and an excitement emotionally, but the other side of that emotional engagement, excitement, is powerful passions that can bring you down. But there's a huge drive, biological drive to have social engagement, to have a desire for peer relationships. So don't be upset or hurt when your 11, 12, 13-year-old who used to love hanging out with mom and dad or mom and partner are now saying, no, I want to be with my friends. I need my friends. It's a drive to go with it and understand. Also, now I told you before, remember this word dopamine. So the brain loves, in adolescence, loves novelty. The kids are seeking novelty. Why is that? Because dopamine is our reward neurotransmitter. And when it is in the adolescent brain, what they've discovered is that the baseline level of it is quite low compared to adults. But when you do something exciting, novel, boom, it goes sky high. So you get the bigger buzz. And guess what? You like it. So you want more of it. So novelty is a big, big part of the dopamine drive in education and kids' development. So are we doing this in school? Are we creating novelty for kids? Are we helping them create their own novelty? Well, in some places they are. And then there's creative exploration. You know, I have said for decades, if you want a sticky problem solved, bring it to a group of adolescents. Why? Because they've got creativity that we can't even start to believe, understand. But, you know, there are some challenges. There are some challenges. And so one of the challenges has to do with the reading of emotion. So if you can imagine again that the brain is under construction, that means that the area of the limbic system deep inside the brain is connecting through experience with the thinking part of the brain. Then they are just learning, just like toddlers are learning how to crawl, then they learn how to walk, then they learn how to run. With emotions, what we're seeing in adolescence, they are learning what the emotion feels like, they experience the emotion, and they live the emotion. And eventually, in maturity, they're able to use their thinking brain to quiet that emotion. But what's happening in the meantime is when adolescents, Dr. Deborah Yergelin Todd did this series of experiments, because when she showed young people, teenagers, this picture, she had her norms of adults that said, when you see that picture, it looks like fear. But when she showed it to these adolescents, they said, oh, no, it looks like she's angry. So she did a bunch of more studies. And what she recognized is that the brain, the emotional brain, is under construction. And under construction means that the adolescents use the amygdala, which is deep inside that limbic system and brainstem, and it is your fight or flight system. It works like that. It doesn't stop and plan and think. We need that system to be super fast. So they are seeing emotion, experiencing it in their limbic system and reacting to it. But over time, it stops there. It stops doing that. It becomes connected. And so at 13, they may see your face and they say, why are you angry all the time? And why are you yelling? And you want to say, you want to hear yelling, really? But by 18, they can say to you, oh, you know what, Mom, I thought you were mad, but I can see you're really thinking about something and you're worried about something. So they're able to, you see that connection, that they're able to experience emotion and connect it to the thinking part and maturely process it. But what in the meantime? So in the meantime, there's this massive communication gap, that teens are more likely to misinterpret facial expressions of emotion. They see anger when it isn't there, because they're processing it in that fight or flight area, and so they react quickly. So here's the million slide. The last area to develop all of these connections and maturity and all of the gray and the white is that blue part, the frontal lobes. Now, when your frontal lobes are your executive director, they're the big conductor. And when you have mature frontal lobes, you're able to govern your emotion, judge, plan, organize, problem solve, impulse inhibition when you have a mature frontal lobe. Is this not a bug list for us as parents when our kids were adolescents? Love them to bits. But I remember when one of my kids, or all 5 of the kids were ski racers. I live in Hamilton. We've got this tiny little hill. So we would have to drive 2.5 hours for ski races. So my boy is about, I think 11, 12, 13, in that area. We arrive at the ski hill and he's forgotten his helmet. Well, you can't do this. You know, we've driven 2.5 hours. It's a 30-second run that they do twice. They usually fall, and he's forgotten his helmet. And he goes fast, so he can't. What are we going to do? Now, there are those who are in the school of logical consequence, and you say, oh, my dear honey, I'm so sorry. You forgot your helmet. I guess you can't ski today, and you'll remember next time, won't you? Well, I have no confidence that that would have worked with my son, nor any, that's another story. But anyway, so what we had to do was we quickly borrowed a helmet from somebody, you know, fingers crossed that there's nothing contagious. We borrowed a helmet from somebody else, but then we had to develop a plan. And so we made a list of, before we pull out of the driveway at 5 a.m., we're going to go over the list. Do you have this, 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 and this in the bag? And eventually my boy said, Mom, we don't need to do the list, because I'd say, have you gone over everything? And then I'd say the list. And then it was, Mom, you don't have to ask me. As soon as I get off the ski hill, I just dump everything into my bag. It's a public health hazard, but it does the trick. So I am not doing the planning and organizing for him. I'm not packing his bag, but I'm helping those neurons areas connect up under construction. But you know, a huge part, as remember I said about neuroplasticity and the brain is built by experience. It's why that opening work that Emily read in terms of the Indigenous children as an example, how the experiences they have of prejudice, of inequity, of racism gets under their skin. It changes who they see themselves as under the skin, because their biology is being changed by that experience. So identity formation during adolescence is absolutely crucial. Now, it's not the only time. Identity, thinking about myself as a learner, starts when you're 4 years old. It starts when you are just arriving in Ontario anyway at school. And so we really need to be thinking, and you think about this as parents, what kind of identity or bits of the identity are you privileging? I push educators to think about, if you're just focusing on numeracy and literacy and not the joy of learning, if you're not focusing on being good at learning and good at life and bringing in whatever experience that child has had, what are you privileging? So anyway, big thing to think about. So what we've got in the brain then is we've got the limbic system saying, do it now, and the prefrontal cortex saying, think about it. But we also have a system where most kids are sleep deprived because there's a glitch in the system. Well, I shouldn't say that, but you know, adolescents don't feel the need to go to sleep until much later. Their sleep thirst is bumped biologically, is bumped later. So they're not keeping themselves up till midnight. They don't have the thirst to go to sleep. But here's the kicker. They need 9 3/4 hours. So here we've got our kids sleep deprived, getting on the school bus, really tired. And it's why some boards are looking at changing the start day. But, you know, remember I said it's a time of vulnerability. So here we've got fast cars, all these drugs, alcohol, all of this going on. And so there is increased risk. So again, what you do as parents and what educators do in terms of connecting, helping kids understand their brain can make the difference. But we need to understand stress. We need to understand the stress and what it does to the brain. So what we know is a little bit of stress is absolutely fantastic. We need it. We need it to push ourselves, to do better, to get out of mediocrity. And so this is from the Harvard Center on the Developing Child, this kind of idea of thinking that stress is positive, but then there's other stress that's tolerable. It's more complicated. You get release of more stress hormones, adrenaline and cortisol. But if you've got relationships, it gets buffered. The stress we really worry about is called toxic stress. And that's where you've got all kinds of stuff happening. You do not have the buffering of adult relationships that are close. So what happens is you're in the fight or flight response when you've got tolerable or when you've got toxic stress. Bang, your fight or flight response is going to be turned on like 90. So you've got a calm state, along comes a stressful event. That organ, that set of neurons that I talked about, the amygdala, fires off, send signals down, release adrenaline so you can run, release cortisol so you can heal, bring in my memory part of the brain, my hippocampus, to figure out, do I know this threat or not? And then the prefrontal cortex can come in and say, oh, we know what this is. The threat is removed, and we get back to calm. But what happens for kids, particularly in toxic stress, is that threat doesn't get removed. It doesn't get removed. So what we need to be thinking about, I'm suggesting, is thinking about if we know that toxic stress affects our kids, can we move it down to more manageable and more tolerable stress? So first of all, you have to have the mindset that my young person is under construction, that relationships matter deeply. So what you think affects how you feel, affects how you act. And so what you can do is see, can I shift the pattern of the stress that we as a family are experiencing? So remember, stress is good. Too much stress can affect our biology, not only the brain that I'm talking about, but your immune system, your inflammatory stuff that happens. But there are things that we can do to bring that stress down. And this is an example, and that leads to better able to cope with the stresses. So we've got daily structure. Make sure you follow a daily structure, have family meals, limit that media like we talked about, exercise, reaching out to others, that connecting, remember that compassion, connection, and hope and love, help others. We know that the attitude of gratitude, being able to reach out and help others, changes changes your brain and changes theirs. Things you can do about sleep as well. Make sure that you've got good sleep hygiene and hope for the future. So it's a good time, as you think about hope for the future, to think about, okay, am I like Jean's asked us, am I a gardener or a carpenter? And then here, I want you to think about each of these different parenting styles create different relationships with children, which creates different biology. So there's in that yellow quadrant, there's the authoritarian, like do it because I said so, my way or the highway. That builds kids' brains. And very often what we see is, I'll do what I'm told, I'll do what I'm told. And as soon as the parent isn't watching, zoom, off they go. Then there is in the pink, the permissive. Oh, I love you, I love you, I love you. Don't put the cat in the microwave. Okay, honey. Okay, honey. So they're very permissive. They don't enforce the rules. That kids know that no actually means yes if you just bug 25 times. In the purple, we've got some very, very challenging parenting styles called uninvolved. where the little guidance, there's very little warmth, there's very little control. So where we want the sweet spot is up in that what Teely area, which is the authoritative, where there's positive relationships, but there is expected warmth and control. So, here's a question to think. Do you ever wonder, what kind of parent am I? And do you ever wonder, if you asked your child, as you walk in the door, do you find home to be more of a refuge or more of a stressor? So how can you get the right answer to that? Well, I've got a couple of things to have you think about. We absolutely have created a world in 2022 where we have play deprivation disorder. Our kids, and I have friends actually who have done studies of this, Maximum City in Toronto. The kids who through COVID were able to get outside and play, whether that was an adolescent playing their guitar, just shooting some hoops, the kids who were able to play were healthier. How much in the education system and the education of your kids are you thinking about? Is there playful learning going on here? I work with some really terrific people who talk about being good at learning and good at life. That we need to have both of those, like the double helix, good at learning, good at life, with relationships connecting. But in order to do that, you have to engage the world. You have to engage the world, and then you can change the world. So how much playful, and I think of inquiry-based learning. Now, people say inquiry-based learning, how do you know that the kids are ever going to reach the curricular expectations? Well, I can help you visit a number of classrooms where there's inquiry-based learning, where there's an inquiry-based learning is the kids have an idea, and the educator is savvy enough to be able to help the kids lead with that idea, to say, what are you learning? And are you going to be connecting it into what we know is relevant on the curriculum? So the power of play, inquiry-based learning. There's other things out there called the spirals of learning and other things. So playful learning. How about the power of play for you as well with your kids? Put down the phones, put down the what do you call them, the tablets, get outside and play. The other thing is adolescents and little kids need to have other people in their life. Find the village for your children. The power of music, I've mentioned, makes a difference. So what can you do to help buffer these stresses? So to be available, be an ally for your kid, rather than jumping on them when there is a behavior problem, to say, how did that feel? What was happening? How can I understand what you're going through? First, seek to understand. Set the limits. I'm not saying be fuzzy, fuzzy wuzzy was a bear, all of that kind of stuff. But then really be reflective and recognize the relationship that you have as it stands right now, and say, you know what? Repair is always possible. That didn't go so well. I'd like to reframe that. And that means you have to be emotionally aware of yourself. So aware of your kid's emotion, stand back rather than react and jump in and try and find it, fix it. Stand back. Listen to your own bodily reaction. I know that there are things that particularly one child can do to set me into orbit, right? So remember I said I'm not a parenting expert. I just have lots of experience. So there was one time, I can't even remember what we were arguing or what the issue was, but I was in flight into orbit. And he comes, I don't know, he was, I don't know, maybe 16, 17. He comes and he says, Mom, You're a child psychiatrist. You know this doesn't work. He also told me that it was no picnic being the child of a child psychiatrist. But, you know, it's a big journey to become emotionally aware of yourself. But my message here is if we can, as adults, be more emotionally aware of our own reactions, put our own mask on first, like they say on the airplanes, and then work towards finding, where is your calm? I've worked, 35 years as a child psychiatrist with families, and lots of people have no idea where their calm spot is. Internally, they may have a happy place like, Michael Kors or Winners or wherever. But inside, where is your calm? It's a task to think about, to figure out, where is that calm for me? Why? Because our kids need us. Our kids need us now in a very, well, I don't know. It feels to me this is a really different way, that they need us to be able to get through this storm. They need us to be the master of the storm. And that's a tough call. So, I want to share with you the work of Dr. Lucy Hone, who looks at people who had enough village around them to be resilient. And resilience, so let's get resilience straight here. Resilience is not a gene. It comes and it goes. It really hugely depends on the community and how you surround yourself. So, sometimes people think, oh, well, he's resilient, I'm not, there's something wrong with me. There's something wrong. There may be in the context, and let's figure out how you can move it forward. But here's what Lucy Hone has understood. 3 characteristics of the resilient, the adults who went through a real rough time, and they came out and said, life sometimes just freaking sucks. Life is hard. Suffering is a part of life. I am going to accept that and just say, no neuron is going to be wasted. No neuron is going to be wasted with me saying, why me? Why now? My friend Kathy Lee says her grandmother used to say, if you fall in a pile of manure, are you going to lie in it, or are you going to get up and brush yourself off? So life can be hard. The other huge thing is, where are you directing your attention? Are you directing your attention on things that you can do something about? Or are you directing your attention on something that you're lost in? So where are you focusing your attention? This is where you can say, where is the joy in education? Where can we find this joy in education? Some things I have no control over, but other things I absolutely do. Ask yourself, is what I'm doing helping or harming me? Are my thoughts going over and over and over again in a way that's not helpful? As I think about love building brains, as I think about how our relationships with our kids significantly alter what we do, I would love for adults in children's lives to be able to think, rather than what's wrong here? What's wrong here? To what can I do here? What can I do here? And here's a way that you can think about it. And these are compassionate coaching questions. You can ask, rather than what's wrong with you, what do you need right now? What's most important? What are you hoping for? What's going well? What helped you the most today? And remember what there's a great early years framework called Reggio Emilia. And the founder of that, Loris Malaguzzi, says, in education, we should have nothing without joy. Nothing without joy. How about we get that with our kids? Because, again, Maya Angelou says, I've learned that people forget what you said. People forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. So how can we do this? Bring more laughter back into family. Bring more laughter into friends. Bring more laughter into your significant relationships. It builds the brain. And then here's homework for you. We now know from the neuroscience, from the study of the brain, that when you have an attitude of gratitude, when you think about what am I grateful for today, so I wake up in the morning, at least I try. I wake up in the morning and say thank you for the birds. I might say, you could have started a bit later than 4:30, but I'm saying thank you for the birds. I'm thanking the sun. I'm thanking that my husband, his snoring didn't keep me awake all night. Whatever, I'm being irreverent here. But the idea that if you can really stop and say, what in my life am I thankful for? There is enough stuff out there that you can say this is wrong. But if you have an attitude of gratitude, if you do this practice of starting every day, it changes your biology, it changes your neurochemistry, it changes how you see the world, it'll change how you see your kids. So remember, love does build brains. And if you can have your eyes light up when that young adolescent of yours comes in, changes her biology, changes you, it changes and builds brains and hearts and souls and love. So I'm going to say thank you very much for being here with us tonight. And I'm going to stop sharing and hand over to Emily so that we can take some of your questions. Thank you so much. I hope you've enjoyed this.
Thank you so much, Dr. Clinton. It is always such a joy to listen to you speak. When you say people will always remember how you make them feel. Certainly listening to you certainly make us feel heard, I think. And we just listen to you and your compassion and your genuineness and authenticity and also your realism of how, parenting is hard, right? It is not an easy task and we're doing the best we can. And so anyways, it's always just such a pleasure. So at this point, we actually don't have any questions listed in the Q&A, but please, folks that are listening, feel free to add questions. We do
or comments.
Comments. Thank
Yep,
you,
absolutely.
Dr. Clinton. Certainly, we have 15 minutes, and Dr. Clinton is more than open to taking your thoughts. So we do have one actually already. So. The question is, this has been phenomenal. Thank you. How can we help to build buy-in with our children's educators? So how do we help to kind of get educators on board with this approach?
Yeah, well, it's a fantastic question. And so I think one is to be honest, is by supporting the kind of work that you, Emily, are doing. By learning more about what is the health and mental health strategy within in the board. And teachers are really stressed themselves, so to reach out to them and say, I heard this talk and here's the stuff that Emily, that is the mental health, is doing, let me share this with you. And also, by the way, what do you take in your coffee? Because I'd love, I don't know if you can have hot coffee in the classroom, but how do you like your apples? But reach out, build those connections. Just as our kids love to hear, you're important to me, I value you. Our teachers need that much, much more than they ever did before. So that's one. Build the relationship, build that partnership. Then and support the work of School Mental Health Ontario and what Emily is doing. And then the other is to encourage your kids to be reflective, so that they can go to the school and they can say, I'm wondering about X, Y, and Z. And so if we've got enough, because I think it's students as change makers that's going to change the system. I think it's students who are saying, I'm wondering why is it that my book that I'm doing in grade 9 is the same as my ancient mother did in grade 9? Could we do something? I just read this book that was really cool. So you start the kids, support the kids and being the change makers. Then you have the conversations. You have the conversations with the with the teacher, build the relationship with the principal, and ask them what's the kind of education system that you long for, that you would like to see, and support. When you see practices that that make sense along this way. I am so optimistic now than way before I was before COVID, because people are saying, many people across Ontario are saying the old ways are not working. Even the kids who are doing well are not happy and satisfied. So there is a major wave on its way. It started. I hope that helps.
Thanks, Dr. Clinton. And certainly we're hearing some positive feedback in the Q&A, just how much people really appreciate this and appreciate the messaging and the opportunity to reflect on this. And I think, as you mentioned, certainly that building of relationships and that partnerships is so key for us here at the OCDSB. That very much is a conversation that we are having with educators, and very much is the foundation of the work, as you were talking about that upstream work, that proactive piece, and how can we really focus on that. That certainly has been a lot of the education and support we've been doing with educators around how can we move upstream instead of always needing to be reactive. So it resonated so much, certainly.
Great.
You know, we don't have another question right now, Dr.
Okay.
Clinton, but what I am wondering about, you did talk about kind of the brain development in adolescence a lot. And you also talked about the 3 R's, the regulate, relate, and reason. And one of the things that we do know with our younger children as well is that regulation is something that has to be learned, right? That sometimes when they're so little, it's really more about that co-regulation. And so I just wondered if, you know, while we had a couple of minutes, if you wanted to speak to that a little bit, to share that knowledge.
Absolutely. Thanks, Emily. So what we know absolutely is that as the brain is changing, as children are developing, well, do you know what? To be honest with you, regulation, the development of regulation, that to me is a lifelong journey. But the biggest absence of having regulation of your emotions, regulation of your behavior, regulation of your thinking, to me simplistically means being kind of aware of them, knowing what you have to do to understand them. And in the olden days, I would have said being the boss of them. So self-regulation, regulation is about kind of being the boss of your emotions. So not hitting out and not grabbing that cookie and etc. And so what we know is that the absolute best way for kids, little kids and big kids, to learn about regulation is to have somebody in their life or some peoples in their lives who co-regulate them, who are there for them to hold them in a space where they can learn that their emotions count, they matter a lot, how they get expressed counts, but that the behavior that might come along with them needs to learn a little lesson or two. So you can't hit, you can't bite, you can't curse. And so you have to, so that happens through relationship, through co-regulation. And kids learn it through that process that I talked about of serve and return, of having adults whose eyes light up when the child enters the room, like every child deserves, but then noticing what the child is noticing and experiencing, reflecting back on, oh, I see you're excited about this. I see you're really upset. You know, what would make, it's funny, I remember my, the kids wanted to have a picture of all of the cousins. So the 7 grandchildren, 5 and under. So get that picture. And we've got a lovely backyard. And so at one point, my daughter has 4-year-old twins. And at one point, one of them got up and ran away. And my daughter said, oh dear, no, said to him, now what would make it easier for you to be able to come and sit? and have your picture taken. And, you know, my first instinct was, well, you know what? I would have just picked him up and brought him down and plopped him down. But it was, he got there. He got back to that in just a few seconds. Oh, well, Mum, if I had to stick, because I really want to play right now. And so that's co-regulation. That's co-regulation. It's not letting emotion and behavior run wild. Absolutely not. It is creating that holding space where you feel safe, significant, and understood. Thank you for asking that, Emily. Such an important concept.
And we have another comment, just wanting to share that the OCDSB does have 8 different child and family centers that really bring families with children from birth to 6 years old to play and learn together, to build positive relationships and develop community, as well as really just helping that transition to kindergarten, which we know is such an important time. And so those are some pieces that we do have in the OCDSB as well.
Fantastic.
So, you know, given we don't have any other questions at this time, Dr. Clinton, and I know that other people will think of things after, and as I said, we'll be certainly watching, I know, this video, but I really did want to thank you for being here this evening and for sharing your knowledge with us. You really talked about that important piece around partnering together. And I think as we start the school year and we support children through these complex times, that is so key for educators and parents to be really working alongside one another. And certainly we value so much what parents and guardians bring and the knowledge they bring to the table. So really looking forward to a wonderful year ahead with that. You also, you know, really highlighted as well the impact these last 2.5 years really have been on parents themselves. And so the need for that self-compassion as well, right? As we kind of move through this, you know, I always say to people, I've been doing training for many years and I quote you many times. So I've been both listening to you and quoting you professionally for years, but also personally, just, you know, with my own children, just really that reminder to connect before you direct or correct has really been invaluable. And your approach to parenting, to supporting children through play, through curiosity, and through compassion is so key, certainly, I think, for all of us. So
thank you so much, Emily. Thank you so much for that.
Well, and thank you also, I wanted to say, just for highlighting that this is a time, I think, for growth and for learning and for renewal, you know, as we move forward. So bringing that kind of hope and optimism forward with us this evening.
Great. So thank you so much.
So we look forward, and thank you to all the parents that have come to be with us here this evening. We certainly value your time, and we hope that everyone has a wonderful evening.
Yeah, and I hope people share and tell people to come and watch the video, see if it gives them something to
Absolutely.
Want them to hug those kids.
Yeah. I'm sure they will. Thanks so much, Dr. Clinton.
Okay, bye for now.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.